So let me see. I know we're at the US highlights and we have two presenters, and you have, I don't know, we'll see, but I see these as two somewhat different presentations in terms of the type of content, but you're both in the United States. So we gave it a label, US highlights. But Courtney's starting and she's going to talk about some work through her center. And then Thane will be doing a follow-up. And I'm looking forward to that, both with the food co-op piece and policy governance and co-op governance. So we're launching into that without much else that I need to say, because you can present yourselves in terms of your institution and anything else you wish to say. And we're just thrilled that you're both participating and providing presentations today. So are we ready, Sonia?
We're ready.
So I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, just give Erin the power. I mean, Erin, give Sonia the power so she can do a share screen. And Courtney, you get rolling and your slides will come up in just 30 seconds.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen and Sonia and Erin and the whole team, Kian, so for having me here and for this. I feel like it's a blessing and a curse to go towards the end of this. My head is full, and my head is full of all the other things that people have been talking about. So I have a lot to think about and some things to weave in, but also I'm thinking about a lot of other things. And so we'll try to focus in on my presentation today. So I'm Courtney Berner. I'm the Executive Director of the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives. We're located, for those of you who don't know, here in Madison, Wisconsin, but we serve the entire state, and we do programming that's national as well. And we do a mix of outreach, education, and research on the cooperative business model. We also have a fairly robust cooperative development program, which is how I got my start here at the center about 10 years ago, is as a cooperative development specialist. So unlike a lot of the presentations that you've heard so far during the symposium, I'm talking about a project that's sort of at the beginning stage. We're not actually reporting out data. Our survey isn't even in the field yet. So this is more of a heads up. Let's think about some of the challenges and opportunities of this type of research, and really an invitation to have a conversation about ways to collaborate as we move forward with this project. So next slide, please. Topics for today, I'll talk a bit about the Cooperative Governance Research Initiative, some of the challenges and opportunities of this type of research, and then what's next for the project. So next slide, please. All right, so how did this come to be? This idea actually emerged from a strategic planning session in 2018, which makes me feel good. It's like, oh, strategic planning working. So the idea emerged as a product that the center could produce that would really leverage our unique position as a university-based center that has research capacity, but we also have deep connections with cooperatives, both startup cooperatives and established cooperatives across sectors. So we're in this, so well positioned to do rigorous research that's also grounded in the needs of the field. So the idea emerged, and then sort of, oh, if we could go back to the other slide, there we go, thanks. The idea emerged, and then sort of moving forward in 2019, once that strategic plan got started, and really spent 6 months vetting the idea of collecting data, cross-sectoral data at a national level around cooperative governance. So spent about 6 months talking to leaders across co-op sectors in the United States, because ultimately I'm more of a practitioner than an academic. I think the only person who thinks I'm an academic is my 98-year-old grandmother. I'll take it, but I cut my teeth in cooperatives, helping people get cooperatives started. And one of the things that I ended up focusing on, as many of us do in the development world, is on governance as these groups are getting started. And there were a lot of questions about how do co-ops, how many people are on the board, how do co-ops do these other structural and process-based things? And I ended up with a lot of anecdotal evidence or stories and not a lot of data on how cooperatives in the US are structuring their governance systems. So this interest in having data on governance systems and structures in the United States really emerged many years ago when I was in a totally different position. So it was really important to me going in as both this quasi-academic, quasi-practitioner to that this project deliver value to the cooperative community in the United States. So hence, visiting with leaders across the US and saying, is this something that you would find value in? Do you think we should do this work? And I said, please be honest, because it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a hard project. If you don't think there's value here, tell me. And we're not, there's plenty of other good work to do in the world related to co-ops. So But everyone, it was a resounding yes, very positive response. So we decided to move forward. We secured some funding to launch the project and get ourselves started. So ultimately the goal is to measure cooperative practices so that we can reflect on and improve them in the United States. Someone earlier in the symposium said, a lot of best practices are really just common practices. So we want to understand what are the common practices, but also what are some of the outliers that might actually be really good practices that we can help carry into other sectors or just popularize more, because we think they're resulting in really strong cooperatives, both in terms of financial performance, but also in how member-centric they are. So one of the other things we did to sort of pull together this university-based sort of industry-informed research was to develop an 11-member advisory committee that's made up of representatives of various co-op sectors from across the country. And so that committee has been really helpful in terms of making sure that we're thinking about all the different needs and even nuances of the different sectors, the different parts of the co-op community here, giving us a lot of feedback. And then also being advocates for the project as we're trying to collect lists of cooperatives for our sample. Let's see here. So like I said, that we got our funding and we launched the project at the beginning of 2021. Hired my co-conspirator here is Dr. Laura Hansen-Schlachter, who was hired at the beginning of the year to co-lead this project with me. She's on maternity leave. She's on parental leave right now and comes back in a couple weeks. Otherwise, she'd be co-presenting here with me today. So again, what is the Cooperative Governance Research Initiative? It's a national cross-sectoral longitudinal survey plus interviews with a sample of cooperatives. So once the survey data comes back, we'll identify a handful of cooperatives to do much deeper interviews with. We're asking questions around governance structures and processes, which we think are important and interesting. We're also trying to go beyond that, around asking questions around culture and performance. And again, by performance, I mean both the financial performance of the enterprise, but also, how well is this cooperative achieving its mission, meeting members' needs. And one of the frameworks that we've used for trying to pull out some of these, just for thinking about the work is Burchell's cake metaphor. So that every cooperative governance system is trying to balance representation, expertise, and member voice. So we're hoping that through the data we're collecting, we can really think critically about how these co-ops are balancing those three elements within their cooperative governance systems. All right, next slide, please. So I want to talk about the challenges and opportunities of this type of work. And by this type of work, I mean collecting data on cooperative governance cross-sectorally, nationally, and also really pulling industry into the conversation and making sure that the research is guided by their perceptions of the needs and realities of cooperatives on the ground. So let's start with challenges. I always like to end on a high note, so we'll end with opportunities. But some of the sectors have really seen this as unnecessary or duplicative. Just National Rural Electric Cooperative Association has opted out of participating. They're collecting really robust data themselves on cooperative governance practices within rural electrics, and so they said, we just don't see that there's value to our members here. So in some of the sectors that are actually well resourced, they have the ability to collect this data for themselves. So that's been a challenge, although I will say that every other sector of the sort of cooperative economy is participating, from housing to credit unions and insurance mutuals, grocery cooperatives, farmer cooperatives, so really worker cooperatives, the whole gamut. So that's one challenge is getting buy-in, and really, as someone who sits in a place where I'm doing a lot of cross-sectoral work, sometimes convincing people in their industry silos that there's value in comparing across sectors is a challenge. But so far, we've been able to make the case, I think, to most parties. Another challenge is just differences in language, and sort of certain nuances between sectors can make both drafting the survey instrument challenging and sort of data collection challenging. So how do you craft a survey that captures the nuances adequately of each sector without, having questions that just don't apply? And so that's been hard, but it's also, an area where having an advisory committee is really useful, because they can say, this doesn't make, this question would never make sense to an insurance mutual CEO. Let's think about it this way, or these are the issues that we're really thinking about in housing that you haven't captured here. So again, the advisory committee has been extremely helpful there. Another challenge is just sort of balancing research best practices with the desires of people in the field who don't have a grounding in methodology. And so, striking the right balance of pulling in the views, perspectives of practitioners, but also creating a research process that is really robust and creating data that can be used more, broadly for, because Laura has interest in publishing and things like that. So, and then the other challenge is that it takes extra time, so pulling in a large group of stakeholders takes time. I spent probably 10 hours one week just having one-on-one conversations with everyone, or not 10, 12 hours having one-on-one conversations with everyone on the committee about feedback on the instrument. But as we often say in the co-op world, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go long, go together, or go far, I think is go together. So we're taking that approach here. We're trying to take that to heart in our process, particularly because it's a longitudinal study, if we are able to secure funding to make it one. And so getting the instrument right this first time is really, really important. Next slide, please.
5-minute warning, Courtney.
Thank y'all. So what are the opportunities of doing this type of cross-sectoral work and also pulling industry into this type of research project? So one of my favorite things to do is really build connections between sectors. I do a lot of governance training. We hold a lot of education for directors and managers within our programming. And, I love when I have a worker owner from Union Cab in Madison and a, farmer from Landmark Cooperative who's been farming for 40 years, come into a room and think they don't have much in common, and discover that many of their challenges around patronage, around member engagement, maybe, issues in the boardroom are the same. And I love seeing those light bulbs go off. And so I think by collecting this cross-sectoral data and being able to really learn from each other, learn from each other's mistakes, learn from each other in terms of what's working well, I get really excited about that possibility. I think it also allows us to potentially build some common language. Again, one of the challenges is coming up with language for the survey instrument that works for all the sectors we're trying to survey. Hopefully that moves us maybe towards some better shared understanding between the sectors and potentially some more shared language. Another opportunity I see is really just, the research questions are informed by the real needs. We're talking, we're vetting this survey instrument with people who are connected to hundreds of cooperatives around the country. And so our hope then is that we're asking questions and collecting data that's interesting to us from an academic perspective, potentially from a theoretical perspective, but we're also asking questions that hopefully result in data that's valuable to cooperatives. Because ultimately, what I care about is having successful, people member-centric cooperatives, and governance, as we all know, this is such a huge piece of that puzzle. So our aspirations go beyond just collecting data, but really into the supporting the cooperative community in our country. So and hopefully we'll see, fingers crossed, that this sort of buy-in from industry leaders from the outset leads to higher response rates. That's our hope. We'll see. I'll report back the next time there's a symposium on how that actually went. Also, hopefully this industry support will lead to more ongoing funding. So we have funding for the first year and a half. We'd like to collect data again in 2023. Hopefully this is a project that ends up, that it can be cooperatively funded by the cooperative community. Everyone pitches in a little bit, and then we get to collect this data. Again, I've already sort of mentioned this ability to learn and share practices across sectors. And then the last thing I'll mention is something that Melissa Hoover, whom some of you may know from the Democracy at Work Institute, she was one of the people that I spoke with during that sort of 6-month exploration phase. And she saw one of the advantages of collecting this data as really helping to build the co-op identity, sort of reminding cooperatives that they are part of this larger co-op community beyond their sector, beyond their industry, beyond their region, and that one of the core things that ties us all together is governance. And those both governance, governance can be the Achilles heel and also sort of the superpower of cooperatives. All right, next slide, please.
Got a minute or two, Courtney?
Thank you. So what's next? We're finalizing the instrument now. Hope to have the survey in the field in late July. We'll be conducting those follow-up interviews in 2021. Hope to secure some funding for 2023. And then really thinking, strategically about two things. One, how do we pull in sectors that are sitting this round out? How do we make the case that this is something you want to be part of, that there's value here? And then how do we look at opportunities to collect or compare data transnationally? So, we've spoken with Marc-André Pigeon about the work that they're doing, collecting governance data in Canada. Are there opportunities here to cooperate across borders in terms of collecting data, so we're able to not just collect data cross-sectorally, but also transnationally, and learn from all the really interesting things that are happening in other parts of the world. All right, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Courtney. Given the difference in the topics between this and the next one, I'm just going to pause and throw out a question for you, because I'm going to use the time that way. So it's just from John McNamara, where in the chat he had said that he's found that in worker co-ops, a challenge for research is that members, correctly in my opinion, see their participation as labor that should be compensated since they are creating value for the researcher. Have you found that in your efforts?
I found that in our efforts in terms of people asking for compensation to participate in the survey. We have not found that yet. The survey is not in the field, so we'll see what folks say when they get the survey. We are offering some incentives. So, there's evidence that offering incentives to people who complete surveys works. So right now we're looking at like a $20 to $5 gift card to REI or something, and then early access to data. So those incentives, which incentives are appealing depends on sort of the person. But we have not heard that pushback yet, but we're trying to offer, a carrot to participate. And trying to keep it in the co-op family.
Thanks, Courtney.
Yep.
And personally, you and I've talked about this a bit in the last year as you've been developing these ideas, and I think it's an exciting model also that you're using. In particular, I really caught on to that advisory council approach, and that you're really getting a lot of that feedback and the cross-sector element of it. I mean, that's just exciting aspects. So the last one that I think will be quick, and then we'll move on to Thane, is, and this might have to go offline because I'm sure there's more you can share, but it's that whether you have any of the specifics yet in terms of the survey and the process for defining the elements of it. So I think that's in progress right now, but whether and when you might have things you could share.
So the instrument is, by the end of the month or mid-July should be done. We are planning on putting the instrument online and just making it available, so that partly so respondents can see it ahead of time as well, and know what they're getting themselves into. But yeah, I don't have anything I can share now, but we will be sharing it publicly. So once it's in its final form, it'll be on our website.
Well, thank you very much, Courtney. At least that just helped me manage the questions a bit, get a few of those off the plate now. And that's the value of us being together and being able to connect and follow up with each other later on the things that we want to make sure we don't miss out on. So I'm going to pass things over to Thane, and 15 minutes, so 5 minutes past the hour, but I can give you a couple prods if needed. So Thane, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. And I am going to share my screen now, and hope that I can give you a very much a practitioner's perspective. So want to sincerely apologize, first of all, for the background noise. I am in coastal Maine with a retail food co-op, which has its annual board retreat today. I'm taking a little break while they work on a project. But as you can see, I'm very much in the field with you. So I'm tremendously grateful to Courtney for her data collection efforts because I'm going to tell you a story from a practitioner perspective, which may or may not prove true or resonate with the academic perspectives. And I just want to appreciate everyone and the presentations to date. I'm learning so much, and I see my job as bringing that work into the field and to my clients. Very briefly, I'm a former food co-op board member and leader. I'm based in Syracuse, New York, although I'm here in New Harbor, Maine right now. I've been a consultant with an organization, a consulting co-op called Columinate since 2007. And I'm part of a team of consultants that's serving boards of retail food co-ops in the US. Since 2004, which is when we sort of start counting data, we've been providing governance support to over 200 food co-op boards with about 100 or more enrolled annually in an ongoing program of support. This board here I have worked with continuously, off and on, continuously since 2009, for example. In the US, retail food co-ops are generally governed by a board of between 7 and 13 consumer members. These retail businesses range in size from as small as maybe $100,000 US in annual sales to organizations that are as big as over 90 million in annual sales. Tremendous amount of diversity. While some food co-ops in the US date to the 1930s and earlier, a large number arose out of the countercultural movement in the late 1960s and 70s. Changes in the natural food and grocery industries, including a wave of competition in the last decade or more, has put the sector under substantial pressure. In recent years, we're seeing a wave of food co-op startups here seeking, among other things, to provide food access, food sovereignty, and food justice. And these startups are led by community organizers who see the co-op model as an opportunity to innovate around business ownership and community empowerment, much like these folks from the Oriana Food Co-op in Traverse City did in 1973. You are all likely aware nearly every social or societal inequity and tension is at play in our food system in the US. Agricultural policy and regulation, labor issues, food safety, health, trade, land use, you name it. And as we have seen here during the pandemic, food co-ops as essential community service providers and community leaders face substantial social pressures. As a result, the consumer directors of US retail food co-ops have a formidable challenge when it comes to managing strategic interdependencies on behalf of their cooperatives. With sincere appreciation to Drs. Poehler, Fulton, Fairbairn, whose work introduced me to that description of the cooperative governance challenge. John Carver's Boards That Make a Difference was first published in 1989. In the late 90s, when I first became a member of a retail food co-op board, there was a broad movement in the sector towards adoption of the model. The model is a good match for the sector. It emphasizes the board's responsibility to the cooperative's owner, and it focuses leadership attention on achieving desired objectives while simultaneously attending to boundaries and role clarity with respect to accomplishment of those outcomes. US food co-op boards are typically structured to turn over 1/3 of their directors every year. This means that having a clearly organized written system for governance is tremendously helpful and requires active and rigorous orientation and onboarding of new directors, which in turn is an opportunity for continuing directors to reflect on and deepen their engagement with the discipline of governance. I want to apologize for the background noise and just acknowledge that you're having a virtual vacation experience in coastal Maine, as the board member who owns this restaurant has graciously provided me this space to talk to you, and the restaurant just opened in case you didn't notice. The broad use of the policy governance model has supported innovation and improved the quality of governance in the sector. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Dr. Brett Fairbairn's 2003 pamphlet entitled The 3 Strategic Principles for the Guidance of Cooperatives has been influential, especially in my work, helping food co-op boards enhance their relationships to and among consumers, producers, and communities. In 2014, my colleague, Dr. Arthur Sherwood, received a fellowship and became an affiliated faculty of the Vincent and Eleanor Ostrom Workshop on Political Theory and Policy Analysis. And based on the work during that fellowship, he collaborated with colleagues to create a model called the 4 Pillars of Cooperative Governance, which has been used to enhance and advance thinking about cooperative governance in the sector, mostly by providing a larger framework for boards to use to conceptualize their work. Retail food co-ops in the US continue to have a leadership role in their communities as trusted and essential service providers and as opinion leaders and experts around food safety, social justice, and cooperative practice, among other things. These end statements from food co-op boards across the country show the impact that the policy governance model has had on the sector. Increasingly now, we see additional innovation, boards working to update their policies to tackle systemic racism and oppression, finding policy governance is a strong framework to allow them to engage with the topic. While governance will always be a uniquely human and therefore a challenging endeavor, having a structure to support and organizing our efforts is remarkably helpful. The practice that US food co-ops have had over these last 20+ years using policy governance has allowed the sector to advance and expand because of its strong, organized, democratic governance. I'm going to stop the share and mute myself so you have a relief from the background noise and turn it back to you, Karen, to see if there are questions for me or for Courtney.
Thanks, Thane. Well, that was quick, so I wasn't yet prepared that you're going to be done. So that's awesome. We have time and a little extra time for discussion of either food co-ops and governance, structures, processes, dynamics in the US context.
Yes, thank you. I apologize. It was either I tell a very long story, right?
No problem. You know, I know there's always a need and an interest in more time to just ask related questions. So we will do that now. Feel free to raise your hand if you want to speak out. Otherwise, I'm going to read the one question I haven't yet. Oh gosh, there's a few in there. I see. Where do I need to go? Nope, no more questions yet that had popped up because we're probably all thinking we had a few more minutes. So is there, I guess I have a question just from your experience, knowing that Columinate is so engaged with food co-ops across the US, but that not all of them are purely consumer co-ops, and perhaps some have converted to be more worker consumer, and I'm not as familiar with all of them. So whether any of them have become even more multi-stakeholder in terms of worker, producer, consumer, and your observations of, you know, how they are addressing the governance needs in those types of co-ops versus the more maybe traditional consumer co-op approach in the food co-op sector.
You know, I'm glad Courtney is here because you have broader experience maybe than I do. I am aware of a handful of multi-stakeholder retail food co-ops within our sector. And the two that come to mind are both using policy governance as a tool to support and organize their governance work. My 2 cents is that the model's emphasis on ownership actually makes it uniquely positioned to be effective in the multi-stakeholder space by allowing a platform for that conversation of relationship to the co-op that's so important. You know, cooperatives also always inherently involve conflictive relationships in the sense of, you know, multiple relationships that are sometimes fundamentally incompatible with you know, from a traditional perspective of desired organizational outcomes. And I think that is, that complexity actually is really where our richness lies as a sector. We ought to be able to have those conversations.
Thank you, Thane. Courtney, any reflections from you?
I'm only familiar with a couple of multi-stakeholder cooperatives in the grocery space. Interestingly, one was in Wisconsin, and it started off as a very small worker cooperative and delivering milk to people's homes, and then they ended up with a storefront. And during the course of working with them, they converted to a multi-stakeholder cooperative, I think in large part to access the capital of potential consumer members. They were trying to expand, and then eventually converted fully to a consumer cooperative because I think the workers were a little burnt out. And anyways, it was a really interesting evolution. So it's not something we see very much, but there's been a lot of pressure within the grocery co-op space in the United States to think more critically about the worker's voice. And so some of that we're seeing in some kind of challenging union organizing campaigns and dynamics. In other places, you have co-ops that have fully embraced workers as a separate and equally powerful membership class. And others are experimenting with ways to more effectively engage workers in a consumer cooperative, which is, really exists to serve the consumers, but workers are such an important stakeholder in that dynamic. So that's all I'll say about that.
Thank you. Just looking for anyone that wants to raise their hand or put a question in the chat. I also just might point out, because again, my observations from the North, being in Canada, not in the US, but having had a lot of relationships with food co-ops, is they do a fabulous job in the US of being very networked and really leaning into federations and associations and the Principle 6 aspect, more so than I've seen in a lot of sectors in a lot of places. So I'm not sure if either of you have any observations on that in terms of how it relates to, the overall strength of governance or the overall strength of food co-ops. But I would just say that, don't take that for granted, because that, and also that your food co-op sector is quite, unique in my view, in that we don't have a food co-op sector that's so sort of focused on the natural food as opposed to the traditional food or the conventional food market. And that seems to me to be very much the heart of where it comes from in the US. At least I'm comparing US just to Canada in this case, not to say it's not exactly the same elsewhere, but that combination, or any observations around linking that to governance strength and even the ability of Columinate to do what you do, I think must be partly related to the sort of highly networked feature of the food co-op movement in the US. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know that how it lends itself to governance excellence, other than that there are enough synergies, there's enough energy that organizations like Columinate can exist, and enough cooperatives to support an organization like Columinate providing assistance, and a real openness and willingness to share, and venues in which to do that, either through National Co-op Grocers or through CCMA, the conference we put on. I think, one of the reasons that some of those connections and that energy exists is that there's the co-op and the folks who are really excited about co-ops, but there's also, that overlaps with this real enthusiasm for local and organic food. And so you have a lot of these like shared values and aspirations about the world that pull people, that network people beyond just their membership in a cooperative. So I see that too in talking about the Colorado example of the networks around renewable solar energy, similar, where you see co-ops that also have this like mission value alignment around renewable energy, climate change, building really strong networks because they have sort of multiple things in common related to their values beyond just the co-op piece.
I would lift up maybe three things, right? So one thing, and I apologize, now my group is doing a drum circle. My sincere apologies. So one thing I would lift up is I think one of the challenges I see my client boards face is something about organizational self-awareness. And so that networking that you're describing, Karen, whether it comes through the form of Cometrics, which has been a really powerful tool for helping a co-op like this main co-op compare itself to its peers, or the supports provided through National Co-op Grocers. I think I want to lift up and celebrate, Courtney, groups of cooperators who I understand came out of your organization in the past, and thinking about influential folks that we know who are now part of the National Co-op Hall of Fame here, thinking of we could think of Bill Gessner, Walden Swanson, we could think of many people, Marilyn Schultz, right? And all of those who I am not now naming, but to whom we are grateful. I think that wave of co-ops that started in the 60s and 70s really brought together some unique leaders within the University of Wisconsin program who built systems. That's what you're lifting up, Karen, and their systems. So network is institutionalized on many levels, from the community building that CCMA has provided and Anne provided leadership in keeping that alive and growing to expand the complexity of governance needs, to the nuts and bolts pieces that have helped keep the business enterprises strong and growing and responding to change. So I see those things as really actually supportive to and maybe complementary to the development of our governance capacity. But as I just said to this group, we are indebted to people who created the systems that we use for networking. And looking now to the new leaders that are emerging in the sector, which is equally exciting and perhaps more exciting.
Thanks, Thane. Yes, we can hear the drums. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up this session.